Welcome to episode 152 of the Brainy Business, understanding the psychology of why people buy. In today's episode, we have a secret surprise guest. Ready? Let's get started.
You are listening to the Brainy Business Podcast, where we dig into the psychology of why people buy and help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain-friendly. Now here's your host, Melina Palmer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Melina Palmer, and I want to welcome you to the Brainy Business Podcast. Today, there's a very special interview taking place on the show, and the person being interviewed is me. And no, it isn't me asking myself questions. I guess that's kind of like every solo episode, but it might be a lot weirder where I would speak about myself in the third person and ask me questions. Thankfully, that's not what we've got going on today. Instead, our interviewer is Michael Bartlett. He is the Director of Experience Innovation at JMARK and also trains people to pass the Certified Customer Experience Exam, or CCXP. We got connected because he's hooked on books. As an avid book junkie, he reviews many of them on his YouTube channel called the CCXP Exam Simulator, which is linked for you in the show notes. Michael was an early reader of What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You, as he was planning to do a review on his YouTube channel, which I believe should be out by the time this episode comes out. Whenever it's available, we'll be sure to link that in the show notes as well. Anyway, as he was prepping for that, he reached out and asked if I had considered having someone come on and turn the tables a bit to interview me about my book here on the Brainy Business. And I said, why not? As I've always found it much easier to answer questions about myself and an experience than to just talk about it. So we got it scheduled, and here we are. I've mentioned the show notes already and want you to know they're waiting for you within the app you're listening to or at thebrainybusiness.com/152. They're fairly simplified this week as it's focusing on the book, which is now live and launched as of this Tuesday, May 11th. Woohoo! There are links to get your copy and to join our free behavioral economics community, the Be Thoughtful Revolution, where you can get the amazing 111-page companion workbook to the book as well, which is also free. Those already on the Brainy Business list got direct links from me in the email you receive every Friday. Not on the list yet? Simply sign up for any freebie at thebrainybusiness.com and you'll be automatically added. Everyone in the States can sign up easily by texting the word Brainy, BRAINY, to 33777. You'll be added to the list and get access to a super secret subscriber space with more than 60 freebies as a thank you. All right, now you know about Michael and you already know about me, so let's jump right in and let him kick things off.
Well, hello, everybody. This is Michael Bartlett, and I'm very honored to be here with Melina Palmer to talk about the launch of her new book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. Melina, thank you for having me on for this very special opportunity.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I do a lot of interviews, but as we talked about, I don't get interviewed on my show. We've done it one other time with a friend, but when you asked about it and said, well, yeah, let's do it. It's easier to talk about my own stuff when people ask me questions about it, I think. So.
Well, being that we're going to be talking about the human mind, I guess from a psychology perspective, I guess we should do the cliche, tell me about your mother.
Oh, right.
Only kidding.
Yeah.
So let's get started. I do want to go back though, and I'd like to ask you, I'd like to just understand the journey. You know, we talk about customer journeys here in the CX world, which I'm part of the CX world, and I find customer experience is starting to overlap a lot with behavioral economics now. And as it should do, if you want to understand customers, you've got to understand, how their minds work. So on your journey, to get to this point, I'm very fascinated by what builds someone up. What are the things that happen in their lives that send them on the paths, that they reach and that lead to great things like this? So just give me a little idea of maybe some quite eventful parts of your life that set you on the journey of having an interest in the human mind, and then maybe some affirming moments, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I've talked a bit about when I discovered buying psychology and why people do what they do. I was in my undergrad, I was studying marketing, and I remember there was just like one paragraph of one book, just tiny little blip about why people buy things. And I thought it was just amazing. And I, in that moment, said, I'm going to get a master's in this. It's amazing. I'm so excited. And I spent the better part of 10 years looking for programs that didn't exist yet because I was a little ahead of my time there. And so I think that just tiny little moment. And, you know, I even remember which classroom I was in. I remember where I was sitting, sort of a thing in that class, and thinking about it for, you know, the next week of like, oh man, this is amazing. And like I said, it was about 10 years before I was I was in a credit union innovation program that we spoke at and did research at a lot of amazing places, got to speak at Harvard and things like that. But we were in Denver and they brought in people from the Center for Advanced Hindsight that were talking about what they were working on. And some of their research, I realized, oh, this is the thing I've been looking for. And they told me it was called behavioral economics, but I only knew to just jump at it because of that one moment, you know, so far before. I would say, as far as something that's shaping, that's different than what I've really ever talked about here on the show, or super publicly, I guess, otherwise. I remember when I was at the credit union and I had been there for a couple of years, and I was in this like executive, like next top executive training type program, again, that was in a regional space, and we had executive coaches and whatnot. I had an individual coach I was working with, and there was a group of about 12 of us from various credit unions. And one of the discoveries that I made for myself in that moment was that I was somebody who really had always cared about looking the best, not necessarily doing my best, but looking the best. And that's, I've talked about, I'm a classically trained opera singer and I've sung for years and I enjoy singing, but I won't do karaoke unless I know every single word in that song perfectly, because I don't want to sing it if it's not going to sound perfect. You know, that is sort of my natural tendency. So as part of that program, you know, realizing this in myself of things that I think really held me back when I played sports, even in school, where you didn't go all out to get the ball, or, you know, because you're worried that you might look weird or you might not get it. And so it holds you back. And then you definitely don't, because you don't try. So I would say having that realization and knowing that I want to actually do what's best for the organization, whatever team or project I'm working on, and know that I might fail and that's okay, was an important realization moment, I think, in my career there, that made it so when I wanted to go start a podcast and knowing it might not work because there wasn't anybody else that had one, I think I was more primed to take that risk in that way.
Yeah, and that's something that's definitely true, is that your podcast has been around for much longer. Every man and his dog has a podcast now, but of course you got out there right ahead of everybody. And so you've got such a wealth of information built up now. I did want to ask you a quick question regarding something you just said about sports. I've noticed myself, and I'd be wondering if this applies to you as well, is having an interest in psychology, I always tend to be fascinated with more strategic sports as well. So I'm very fascinated. I'm a Chelsea FC fan, so I'm very fascinated in the mentality of what's going on in the dressing room, how you can have one manager with a team that's doing terribly and you only replace the manager and suddenly the team is doing completely differently, which is something we've experienced at Chelsea FC. Also, I notice I like chess quite a lot as well. I'm very fascinated by some of the psychological games that go on between the players. Do you have anything like that as well, given your interest in psychology? Have you been drawn to that or seen other fields where you found that you could apply those kind of insights?
Yeah, I think definitely a great point. It's an interesting aspect if you think about just even applying that for teams and businesses and whatnot, where it can really just be one piece that's throwing everything off a little bit. And if that, the ball hog, or like you said, the wrong coach or whatever that is, or going into the locker room at halftime and having the good pep talk that lifts you up, or the bad one that sets you back, and regression to the mean if you were doing really well in the first half. And so you get overconfident and whatnot. I remember too, before I even started studying behavioral economics, being in a fantasy football league, and that was American football, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
And that I remember looking at and having my players and choosing, like, I'm going to bench this quarterback, or I'm going to bring this one in, to where I was saying, they got totally blown out against this team last time they played them. And it was a really paramount one. And I feel like this guy's going to have something to prove, and he's going to have a big game, even though it was against some of what maybe predictions were, trying to think through the logic of stuff like that. And, I feel like it worked sometimes, but it was always like, I knew that guy was going to do that sort of a deal. And I'm sure I overemphasize how good I was at that particular guessing game, but all of that definitely plays in, and that mindset and how you can rally people up. I remember too, there was something really interesting. I saw a clip, and I don't know what the movie actually was, but it was talking about this mindset of how, so our brains will limit us and feel like we've pushed too far. Your body can keep going, but your mind feels like you should stop, which is something that happens to all of us all the time, where that will come up. And this was football players, and guy was having to do some sort of like crawl down the field, and they all couldn't get past, the 20-yard line or something. And so then they blindfolded this guy, and he's having to, crawl his way, and say, just, you're cheering him on, keep going, keep going. And he made it all the way to the other end zone when he couldn't see. It was hard, but he made it the whole way. And then you take off the blindfold and realize how much you've done. So I think those ties and how our brains can hold us back psychologically in sports definitely translates into business for sure.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. I remember. So a lot of my journey was, I remember I worked for this little startup company here in Southwest Missouri, where I still live. And at the time, I didn't really have much of an interest in business. I actually found business kind of a boring subject, like a bureaucrat subject. And I didn't know that any of this stuff existed that we enjoy now. So, and psychology just on its own didn't really interest me. So I remember it was only when things started to go wrong, the company got taken over by an investment firm. The wrong people got put in leadership positions, and then they started bringing more of the wrong people in. And you see these cracks emerge in reality, and you say, hang on a minute, this doesn't make any sense. And then when something doesn't make sense, you then start scrambling to try and find ways to explain it. And that's kind of one of the things that led me into this world, was trying to understand things. I just want to make sense of the world so I don't ever get caught in a situation like this. Or if I do get caught in a situation, I can fix it. And of course, you've clearly been through something similar, because you have a business that essentially goes around and fixes these kind of problems. As Rory Sutherland says, these psychological problems as opposed to objective problems. So before we get to your book, which I am very excited to talk about, I do want to talk about the Brainy Business as well. Just how did that all get started? Was there an incident where you thought, oh my God, I need to go out there and start helping people because something terrible happened and I don't want that to happen again? Like, what was the inciting incident behind starting that company?
Yeah. So I was working at the credit union and running the marketing department there. Like I said, I was in that innovation program, met the people from the Center for Advanced Hindsight. But even before that, really, I had been doing freelance work on the side. So figured, and that type of work was, I'm doing really heavy strategic stuff at work all day, and, going to decompress and, read books or be mentally editing things anyway. So I might as well have that be part of a kind of a side gig. So I was writing blogs for people, for entrepreneurs, and was editing books as just a side hustle while I was running this marketing department. And then just figured I was going to get the master's program. I was planning to stay at the credit union and just have it be, an add-on to the work that I was doing there. And in a kind of happenstance, my now husband, then fiance, and I had the opportunity to move closer to his work, and just for a lot of reasons, things that all made sense life-wise. And so said, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. And I'll just have my business be something that I do full-time. And had a really unique, beneficial opportunity in, was able to leave my full-time corporate job. I always say that with air quotes because credit unions aren't super corporate. It's a different lifestyle, I guess, when you work in one. And from being, more than full-time, multiple boards and things that I was on, and to leave that job and my, 800 square foot apartment in downtown Seattle to move to a 4-bedroom house that my husband already owned that had renters in it that we were able to move to. And the net difference per month was like $250, just silly to where it was like, I can make that up in freelance. No problem. There's like no weight on me really to do that. And so I had this unique opportunity to really just focus on the school and really dig in on my courses and the learning versus often if you are getting a master's, especially where you've already been in industry for a while, it's like a thing that you sort of read a little bit at night or have to cram and kind of surface level things a bit. And I was able to just immerse myself in everything behavioral economics, which I'm so excited about and super loved. And through that process, I realized while anyone who is on the academic side of behavioral economics would say I was late, right? You think of the Kahneman, Thaler, even like Katie Milkman, all these, there's amazing research that's been going on for decades at this point. But in applied behavioral economics, there was surprisingly little that existed when I started my master's program. And the things that were so obvious to me about how this applies to communications and marketing and brand strategy, and like you said, user experience journeys, and even pricing and product shaping within a business, actually using this, there just wasn't anything, nothing really in the world. And it was so clear for me. And so I knew that I wanted to really shape my marketing. Then it was just really a marketing firm around that type of work. And I was at a mastermind strategy session with some female entrepreneurs, a woman who has a podcast called Biz Chicks. And I've talked about this on the show before, but I had said, I see the empire at the end. I can see what my company could be, but there are 85 ways to get there. And I'm not sure which lever to pull first. I think I'll have all these things at the end, but where do you start? And she had said, I never, ever, ever tell anyone to start with a podcast because they're difficult and they take up a lot of time, but you need to go do this yesterday. You have to go do it immediately. Go start this thing. And that was, I remember it was May 19th, 2018. I remember partially because we had just bought a house and I was speaking at a conference that weekend. And so I said, okay, I'm going to do it. So May 19th, yes, I'm going to do that. I completely rebranded my company, started figuring out how to do a podcast and what that even looks like, and launched the new company of the Brainy Business, rebranded and kicked off the podcast with its first 3 episodes on July 6th of 2018. So, 6 weeks later, and here we are.
So in that time between then and now, obviously a seed developed, and the seed was, you know what, I need to take this knowledge and put it into a book. When did that seed start, and what was the impetus behind that?
I feel like on some level, I've wanted to write a book for a long time, and partially even in a world where I was editing a lot of other people's books. You know, you go through that process, and I can tell you, editing a book is different than writing one. But the idea and kind of knowing I would have a book was something that's always been in my brain, I guess. But I had this kind of notion, everybody I knew was self-publishing and things. And then you just have books and you do more speaking and things like that. And so I had figured I might go that route as well, because it was something that I knew you can do, and you can do them fairly quickly, and you can just churn out books and whatnot. And my husband has always been just amazingly supportive of everything and pushed me to do more than what I thought I ever could. And so at any point when I say, well, I can't imagine that anyone would have me do X, or I don't know if I could get a traditional publisher or whatever. And he says, well, of course you can. Like, why would you even think that? And let's do it. We'll make it happen. Whatever it is, we'll make it happen. Yes, you can. Which if you don't have someone like that in your life, everyone who's listening and whatnot, totally worth it. It allows you to do amazing things. So, that's where my husband had said, might as well try. There's no reason that you have to have a book right now. There were some of those artificial milestones I put on myself of, wanting it published before X age and whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But decided might as well try. Like he said, if you go in, pitch it to a few places and it doesn't get picked up, you can always turn around and self-publish, but give it a year of seeing what happens. And so I ended up getting a publisher, and that finalized right at the beginning of 2020. And I would say I had really started the process of looking for an agent and kind of digging around. How do you even do this? Maybe not even halfway, but really sort of toying around with that since the end of 2018. And so right around, end of 2019, first part of 2020, found my publisher. And then we finalized what the book specifically was going to kind of be about in May when I signed my contract. So my manuscript was due at the end of August. So it was a fairly quick turnaround time, but having the podcast as a baseline, having an idea of what I wanted to write about, and being a pretty quick and efficient writer made it all possible.
Very impressive. That was a very, very fast turnaround as well.
Yeah.
Your book is very unique, and it's all credit to you for what you've accomplished, because what it serves as is not, I mean, it's a big book, but it's not like some little bite-sized reference guide by any means. It's almost 300 pages. But within those 300 pages, there are some rabbit holes that it invites you to go down if you want to go down them. If you want to learn more about this particular subject or what's in the content of this particular chapter, here are 5 episodes from the Brainy Business that you can go listen to. So the whole thing constructs itself really well in that it almost becomes its own super course, because you can read the book, and then if there's any areas that interest you, you can zero down on those. So I was wondering, when you were putting together the structure of the book, was it informed by the fact that you had a body of work already and you could build around that, or did that only play partially into it?
Yes. One of my favorite ways to answer questions. So it did have some assistance in shaping what to put in there. And I would say having the podcast content, as well as having had my membership group and consulting and speaking engagements, and just knowing the types of questions that I get most commonly and where people get stuck, and having an idea is able to really round out the way that I approached some of that content. But going through, it's clear, I think, for people who listen to the show, and, I have people ask me all the time, how do you decide what the next, what the episodes are going to be and the flow of them, how do you shape that? And more often than not, I thought that sounded interesting and I wanted to read about it, and I thought you might like it too. So here we are, right?
Yeah.
A guest mentioned a concept, and so I went down my own rabbit hole and decided to tell it to everybody else on how to use it. So with the book, I had an idea of some concepts that had to be there: framing, priming, loss aversion, anchoring, reciprocity. But then going through and seeing how deep and where they would fit, I knew I wanted the concepts to each have their own small section, chapter, what have you, and make it really easy to flip back and forth. And not quite a choose your own adventure, but similar, right? Where you can go up here and then make your way back and see how it all comes together. So I knew that if I'm putting together, whenever I put together a course or a book, or, the podcast has lots of back references. And so that interconnectivity is so critical to the way that the brain works anyway. And so in teaching the reader of how to think about all of this and say, you maybe thought about this, which is something you saw back here, and don't forget about that, and give you that opportunity to make those connections and jump around in a controlled sort of environment, I think was something that I really wanted to achieve with the book. And I feel good that it does that. I appreciate, like you said, it's kind of like its own super course, but I am creating a course that I'm going to be having as a add-on that people can buy to do, where me walking through with you, training and we have a PDF workbook. Like you said, it's a robust book of 299 pages, I think is where it ends up, which is funny. I've had people ask in the book launch team, like, what's the psychology behind 299 versus 300? Of which that's on the publisher. Yeah, it's 299 pages and I believe 201 citations. So it all adds up just right for you there. So being able to make it so you can use and apply and go deeper. We have then a PDF workbook, like I said, that's even more ways to apply, that's free and available on the website, stuff that couldn't fit in the book. And then if you want to dig even deeper and have me kind of walking you through that, there's a course that we'll have available as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I have to commend you. I really love the structure of the book. And I think when you describe it as a workbook, that's a great way to position it, because when I work with different folks, I work at a company called JMARK, and they said to me recently, if we're going to start helping some of our clients out in this space, can you give us like some examples that we can go to them with? And do you have like a methodology that we can use? And you can kind of, think on your feet, but to have this book, it's what it reminds me of a lot is Cialdini's book, where he lists out his 6 principles, but you've got all of them. You've not just got those 6, but there was one on herding that was in there, which I thought was fantastic. And so all these little nuggets. And so it's almost like a buffet dinner, and you can pick out the ones that are the most appropriate, and then you can go apply them. And for everybody listening, one thing that I really, really liked at the end of the book was Melina gives a really great example of how you can chain these things together as well. And it was a bakery example, which I won't spoil for you, but you'll find it in the latter half of the book. But I really like that. And I get the impression that people working with you directly would be able to get all those kinds of insights to their unique problems, different ways of chaining these techniques together to really maximize them.
Yeah. And that really is the reason why the PDF workbook exists as well. So the end of each chapter has to start applying this right now, write a couple things, do something in this moment, overcome some of that time discounting, put a couple notes, and you can write directly in the book. But also, as you start applying, you want to be looking at framing again and again and again. And once you wrote in the book, you don't want to necessarily lose that or whatever it is. So making it so that you can have your reference guide, go back and see what something is as you're working with that PDF, and you're able to make your notes and then use it on the next project where maybe you combine it differently with other concepts to achieve some other goal. It lets you just really apply the information. And I know it says this early in the book where I'm talking about like what you're going to get and why it's set up this way. Just like to help you be successful, I'm priming you and telling you about this right now. And it's set up in this way to help you be successful. And like, believe it or not, we'll talk about it again, because your success matters to me. Like, I really want you to be able to use and apply and do what you set out to do with the book versus that, optimism bias or thinking I'm going to do it. I'm excited. And then it sits on a shelf. That would be one of the hardest things for me. If it just sits on a bunch of people's shelves and doesn't get used.
Well, some fun questions to wrap everything up. I wanted to ask you, let's imagine somebody's read the book and you had a magic wish that they could take 3 things away from the book. What would those 3 takeaways be that you would just insist people had when they left?
I think would be that they know that the testing piece is something they can do and achieve and start using and applying behavioral science. But the most important thing from when you are going to get started is spending more time thinking about the problem, making sure that you are addressing the right thing, you're working on the right things instead of just the first problem that came to mind or the first thing that was presented to you as the issue. Taking that time to really scope out what you're trying to achieve and understand and why, which is borrowed a lot from academic research models, but really taking the time to know what you're doing and why it matters and make sure it's the real problem is paramount, number 1 item to have there. The second piece, I think, is knowing that you can test these things. You can go and be using behavioral economics and having good impact within your business if you take the time to understand those concepts and how they can work together and thoughtfully put together some experiments, knowing that just because something doesn't work doesn't mean that behavioral economics doesn't work. And it doesn't mean that you did anything wrong, but everything is a learning opportunity to then grow and see if there's a different question or why did that happen? You just be a continual curious questioner is really important and can help you go very far in business. And I think the last piece is probably just that there are times where you should still reach out and find a partner. So when it's a really big critical project where there's millions of dollars on the line or something along those really, really critical rebrand or something, it's worth investing. Like you said, I have a baking analogy that I use within part 3 of the book and say, if you've invested in becoming a good baker and you start with box cake mix and then you get up to where you're making some things from scratch, you can make every birthday cake with confidence and you're feeling great. When it's the wedding cake, you still hire somebody to help you. So I think having that awareness that it's okay to still have partners, just like marketing firms still, or, marketing departments within organizations will still hire outside agencies. I really think, behavioral science is going to be in that same way to where you partner with businesses to help them to achieve these bigger things. So just having some awareness of that it's okay to have a limit as you test some of those and knowing that you should just test small and test often.
Yeah, it was really great to see that you had the chapter there on testing. I read a book last year. I review books on my YouTube channel. Of course, my review of your book will be going up with my top 10 takeaways as well. And I read a book called Almost Alchemy, and it was great because the author basically said, don't think of A/B testing as something marketing does. A/B test everything in your business if you can, because you'll be amazed. There was you probably heard of the publisher called A Book Apart, and they have Event Apart as well, which is their little online event they do. It used to be in person before COVID. And I distinctly remember they did a presentation where they showed people 2 landing pages. And they said, vote for the one that you would think would convert the best. And then they showed the actual behavioral data from which did convert the best. And everybody was shocked. Well, maybe 70% of people were shocked because that's the number of people that actually picked the wrong one. So it just goes to show why testing is so important. And then in the book, Almost Alchemy, he also shows how if you tweak that along a sales funnel, and those little tweaks are optimized at each point, you can actually end up having a huge gain in revenue just from small tweaks. So I was very, very happy to see that there. And then the final thing I wanted to do was just to ask you a little bit about some of the books that have inspired you in your journey, your favorite books that maybe you would recommend to other people, just the things that fire you up and got you excited about the space.
Yeah, I know we were talking about books at the beginning, and we are both book lovers and avid readers, and I obviously get quite a lot of books that show up in the podcast with interviews and things like that. So for me, I would say, if you look at the early days of when I was just finding behavioral economics, the one that stood out so much to me at that time and was just very, very impactful was Predictably Irrational. And I don't know how much of it was because Center for Advanced Hindsight is what first helped me to key in on what I was looking for. And Dan Ariely wrote that book. But that is one I really appreciate his writing style as well, to where it does have that conversational story type of a tone to it as he is explaining all the research and what they found. I think he does a really nice job of making those high level, really academic concepts be shared in a way that people can grasp and get. I know we were talking about Thinking Fast and Slow at the beginning, which was a hugely impactful book on me as well. And one that I think anybody who wants to be in behavioral economics or behavioral science, you got to read it. It is one that you should read. It's dense though. And it is easier to read than Kahneman's academic research papers. And I find it to be just a thrilling, I love reading the book, and I have my students read passages from Thinking Fast and Slow as well, to where I say like, yeah, you can watch some of his talks at Google and things like that. But when you read it, it gives you this insight into the connections within his brain of how he got from A to Z, really, in some of those. And it's like that peek behind the curtain that I think gives you this insight into this genius brain that shaped an entire field that we all love. So for me, Thinking Fast and Slow still is a very paramount, important book that I go and reference often. So I think those two are some of those early shaping, understanding how the field has evolved books. As far as one where if you really want to be digging in and using this on a deeper level where you're more like a textbook, Steve Wendell's Designing for Behavior Change is an awesome book.
My first book subject.
Hey, nice. Yeah, it's awesome. So well described, and the way that, flowing through all these different aspects. He's been a guest on the show. I really, really do enjoy his book and think it's got some really great information within it. Lastly, I would say The Buying Brain is one that I read in my master's program, and it had a lot of impact on me as well in understanding how the brain works when people are buying things and looking back at how we've evolved over time and just all that shaping. So I know we talked about having 4. So I would say those are my 4 books that are really
awesome. Well, I don't have 4, but I have 3 little nuggets that I wanted to share with everybody, having read the book. A lot of this stuff is very familiar to me. I've been in the space for a while now, but occasionally you either get reminded of something you'd forgotten about, or you do see something new and you think, wow, that's really interesting. And so from an early part of your book, the first nugget that I really liked was where you reminded everybody about first impressions and the kind of mode that people are in when they first encounter your business, as opposed to how they might be, later on down the line, So I thought that was a really, really interesting takeaway. And then the other 2 I have are actually quotes I pulled out from my notes. So the second takeaway is everything that happens before the price, brackets context, matters much more than the price itself. And I know people tend to second guess themselves and probably spend way too much energy worrying about price and adding a few dollars here and taking a few dollars away there. And actually probably understanding pricing psychology would benefit them much more because, as you said, all the things that lead up to that point, all of the framing and the positioning and the priming are going to make so much more of a difference than the actual price itself. So I thought that was great. I first learned about that stuff actually from, it would have been probably my second or third book on the subject, which was, and I know he wrote the forward in your book, Roger Dooley's book. What was the book called again? It was his neuromarketing book.
Brainfluence?
Brainfluence, that's the one. Yeah, that's where I first learned about that. And then the third quote I have here is, in reality, our brains tend to overvalue gifts we receive and compensate in a way exceeding that. I did not know that. I knew about reciprocity, but I did not realize that they overvalue and therefore overcompensate. I thought that was a beautiful little takeaway as well. So I got some really great nuggets out of this, and it was a really cool way to see all of the stuff that I've been learning since I first found this space in 2016, condensed down into one easy-to-access place with, like you say, almost like these little hyperlinks at the end of each chapter, so you can find all of the related material if you need to go off and go down some rabbit holes. So thank you for allowing me to have an early copy of the book, Melina, and I really enjoyed reading it, and I really enjoyed having a chance to talk to you about everything that led to this point. So I wish you all the very best with the release, and hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun. Thank you again to Michael Bartlett for joining me on the show and taking the lead to turn the tables and interview me about my new book, What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You. I had a lot of fun in our conversation and always think it's interesting to learn what stands out for someone else and the kinds of questions they ask. What did you find most interesting in the interview? What would you ask if you were on the other side of the mic? You can get some practice at this in my free behavioral economics community, the Be Thoughtful Revolution, which will have regular Q&As with me and other experts in behavioral science. It's such a fun space to be. We held the virtual launch party there this week, and I was so honored to have participants from around the world. We had people from Switzerland, Sweden, the UK, Finland, South Africa, Nepal, Canada, and the US, which was so fantastic. Thank you for everyone who attended and everyone who has bought the book so far, making it the #1 new release in multiple categories on Amazon, including market research books. And interestingly, its different formats are currently #1, 3, and 5 in that category, which is pretty cool. If you don't have your copy yet, please use the link in the show notes to get yours. For everyone interested in bulk buys, either for your business unit or to give out as gifts or whatever, the publisher has discounts on as little as 10 books, which is awesome. Send me an email, melina@thebrainybusiness.com, and I'll be happy to connect you to get all the details and place those orders. Also, thank you for the 5-star ratings and reviews that have started coming in. For everyone who's ordered and started receiving your copies, will you please leave a rating and review of the book as well? It helps the book be more likely to come up in searches and found by others looking to apply behavioral economics in their businesses, and I would be so, so grateful. Lastly, please do share about the book on social media using the hashtag #WhatYourCustomerWants. Tag me, the Brainy Biz, so I can see and reshare it as well. I appreciate you all, and I'm so amazed and honored by this experience. I'm an official published author now, everybody. It's a bit surreal still, but I'm sure it'll sink in someday. There are links to get your copy of the book and join the Be Thoughtful Revolution to get your awesome PDF companion workbook, all in the show notes at thebrainybusiness.com/152. And thank you again to Michael Bartlett for turning the tables on me on the show today. It was a lot of fun to be on the other side of the conversation here on the Brainy Business. Next week in episode 153, I'm joined by Nuala Walsh to talk about using behavioral science to better understand whistleblowing and why it is so important for businesses to use it to make a shift. Her research is fascinating and eye-opening. You won't want to miss it. Until then, thanks again for listening and learning with me. And remember, to be thoughtful.
Thank you for listening to the Brainy Business Podcast. Melina offers virtual strategy sessions, workshops, and other services to help businesses be more brain-friendly. For more free resources, visit thebrainybusiness.com.